Hello, everyone. Welcome to NSLI Interactive's first virtual event of the 2021-2022 academic year, entitled Overcoming Language Obstacles on the NSLI-Y Persian and Indonesian programs. My name is Alexander, and I work for the NSLI-Y team at Iron USA. My colleagues Katie and Kyle will be helping out with this event as well. Thank you so much to all of you for joining this evening, both on Zoom and on Facebook. Before we start with the presentation today, let's quickly go over some of the functions in Zoom as well as the outline for the event. So make sure to rename yourself so your first name appears. Make sure you're muted when presenters or a fellow attendee is speaking, and video is optional during the presentations. So the event will begin with a brief introduction to the NSLI-Y program, and then each of the three alumni panelists will give their presentation. And following that, we will have a Q&A session with all of the panelists. So while the panelists are presenting, please think of any questions you have, and you'll be able to put them in the chat box, to unmute yourself, use the raise hand feature. Any way that you can think of to ask questions is fine. And you can also privately message me on Zoom, and I can give the questions to the panelists as well. So as a reminder, this event will be about 1 hour, so it will end around 8 p.m. Eastern time. Next slide, please. So before our speakers present, I just want to give some background information for anyone not familiar with the NSLI-Y program. The NSLI-Y program, which stands for the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, is a scholarship program for American high school students funded by the U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Every year, NSLI-Y brings around 600 students overseas to study a critical language such as Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, Indonesian, Korean, Russian, Turkish, and Persian for either a summer or academic year. Students on the NSLI-Y programs immerse themselves in the local culture, practice citizen diplomacy, and work to become experts in their language. The NSLI-Y program has a lifelong impact, and our speakers today will speak to that. So we will be hearing from 3 NSLI-Y alumni from the NSLI-Y and Persian Indonesian summer programs. Next slide, please. So we have Richard. Richard is an alumnus of the 2019 NSLI-Y Indonesian summer program. He is currently a third-year undergraduate student pursuing bachelor's degrees in geography and integrative biology. In his free time, he enjoys reading, backpacking, and nature observation. And in the future, he hopes to work in conservation biology and geospatial analysis. Ryan is an alumnus of the 2018 NSLI-Y Tajik Persian summer program. He is currently a third-year undergraduate student and is pursuing degrees in computer science and linguistics. Since participating in NSLI-Y, he has worked with organizations such as NGO Sadokat and the American Spaces in Tajikistan, and has been awarded a Boren Scholarship for studying in Tajikistan. In his free time, he enjoys playing the carillon, weightlifting, and discovering new music. After graduation, he plans on continuing his education in computational linguistics. And last but not least, we have Aurelia. Aurelia is an alumna of the 2018 NSLI-Y Indonesian summer program. She is currently a first-year student at university and is planning on majoring in economics and international relations. Since participating in NSLI-Y, she has studied abroad in Indonesia again through the Yes Abroad Scholarship. In her free time, she likes to hike, read, and learn languages. She also helps support other students who wish to study abroad as a virtual NSLI-Y alumni rep. For those who cannot join us live today, we are recording this webinar, and we will post it on the NSLI-Y Interactive website and to our YouTube page soon. So without further ado, I will pass it off to our alumni panelists to begin with the presentations. Richard, please go first, and you can go to the next slide. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Richard Hasegawa. I took part in the 2019 summer program in Indonesia, studying Bahasa Indonesia. I'm sure you're all very excited to learn more about the program, and some of you may be a little nervous, but hopefully we can share some of our experiences to help you learn more about the process of language study and alleviate any concerns that you might have. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of background, when I first took part in this program, I already had a fair amount of experience with language learning, but Indonesian was unrelated to any language I'd studied before. Everyone comes to this program with a different level of knowledge of the language and foreign language background, but if you don't have much experience with foreign languages, that's perfectly all right. Your teachers and your host families will be very accommodating in helping you maximize learning at your own level and pace. I think that before your program begins, it's extremely beneficial to start studying your target language using the provided materials and on your own. The resources curated for you are a good primer on the writing, vocabulary, basic sentence structure, and common expressions of your language. On your own, I recommend that you focus on understanding some of the basic grammatical structure. I know that grammar isn't the most exciting aspect of a foreign language for most people, but understanding the language on a structural level is the best way to maximize your ability to absorb new information throughout your study. Once you're familiar with the structural components, it will be much easier to actually apply new vocabulary that you learn, which will make it easier to better retain it. In fact, a common exercise that I do when I'm first trying to learn a language is I'll try to fit a new vocabulary word into as many sentences that I know how to make, which helps cement both the sentence structures and the meaning of the word in my mind. Another thing I would highly encourage before your program begins is listening to the target language through movies, TV shows, music, or videos. Don't worry about understanding the things that you hear, but experience listening to the sounds of the language will help lessen the shock when you're first immersed in the language through your classes. Familiarity hearing the cadence and the common words will help you better replicate these sounds on your own. Depending on what your target language is, the amount of resources you will find online will vary. You can almost always find a good resource that will provide you with at least some exposure. I also suggest you consider getting a compact grammar book of some kind. These can be used as a quick reference when speaking or listening to the language without being as overwhelming as a full textbook. Next slide, please. As pretty much anyone can tell you, during your program, your best language resources will be your classes and your host families. The classes will be intensive, there will be homework, and you'll often feel tired at the end of the day. However, I encourage you to take full advantage of the expertise and resources made available to you at this time. In my program, each of the teachers who worked with us had a different emphasis in their teaching and brought a unique perspective on Indonesian culture. The lessons will vary, but you can expect to have a mixture of written exercises, dialogues, presentations, and listening comprehension. There will also be a number of activities or excursions that will deepen your understanding of the culture. These activities will be a great opportunity to try to develop your language skills. It can be intimidating talking with new people outside of the program, but it's a good benchmark to see how far you've progressed in your target language. As part of our program, we bargained with merchants in a fruit market, which required applying a lot of the language lessons we had learned and required us to be more flexible in using the language. If you hear differences between how you learn language in your classes and when speaking with new people, it's a good opportunity to ask your teacher, and they will likely be able to explain how the formal language differs from everyday speech. Next slide, please. Your host families are an equally important part of your learning process with this program. There can sometimes be an initial awkwardness if you have not taken part in an exchange before. It's easy to feel like you're imposing on them, but you should know that they're taking part in this program because they have a strong desire to share their culture and learn more about our own. So the best thing you can do is to be inquisitive, respectful, and open to learning about their experiences. There's a good chance that your host family will want to speak to you in English for part of the time. For many hosts, the program presents an unusual opportunity to practice speaking English with a native speaker. It's great if you can help them study English, but try to find a balance so you're able to practice speaking in your target language as well. In my case, I would usually speak with my host brother in English so that he could practice, and I would speak with other members of the family in Indonesian so they could give me feedback and correct me when needed. One unique role of the host families is that they can give you practice speaking in a less formal setting. Some host families will tell their children to use more proper language when speaking with you, but I recommend politely asking them to use vernacular language sometimes, because this exposure does not come as often through your classes. By synthesizing what you learn from your classes and your host family, you can learn to adapt to speaking the language in a variety of situations. Your host families can also provide you with unique insight into the culture and the language. One of the great things I enjoyed about Indonesia is that it's so linguistically and culturally diverse. Within my family, they spoke 3 different Indonesian languages, and they were able to teach me words from these languages and tell me more about the different cultural traditions in Jakarta. Asking your host family about their own cultural experiences will help show your interest and will greatly enrich your learning throughout this program. Next slide, please. I think the biggest language learning roadblocks participants had during my program were from initial trouble distinguishing words and sounds and from difficulties with sentence structure. Again, I highly recommend that you try to immerse yourself in media in the target language, both before and during your program. This will help with both of these issues, especially if you try repeating sentences every once in a while, so you can become more attuned to the sounds of the language and the way it is structured. Vocabulary is also something that people tend to have difficulty building up at first, but this can be overcome with practice. If rote memorization does not come easily to you, I highly recommend trying to come up with several sentences featuring the same word. This will force you to engage with the meaning of the word and will allow you to remember it more easily when speaking spontaneously. Studying the language's structure will also help you build up vocabulary, as it can often provide information on the structure of words, which will make it easier to guess or remember their meaning. For example, in Indonesian, many words are made by taking a root word and adding several prefixes or suffixes. Instead of having to memorize each individual derivation, learning a few patterns of prefixes and suffixes, along with some short root words, make it much easier to remember long words with several components. Another common experience is a sense of fatigue or culture shock. My best advice to deal with these issues is to avoid retreating in English media and to take good care of yourself. Try to find ways of relaxing that still allow you to remain engaged with the language and with your host family. A lot of times, watching TV in Indonesian with my family at the end of the day was a good way to unwind without isolating myself. At the same time, make sure that you're getting enough rest. Your days will be very busy, so it's important to make sure that you get adequate sleep at night. Doing this will make it much easier to stay refreshed and to make the most out of your experience. My experience in Indonesia and other parts of the world is that people are always impressed by anyone who wants to put forth the effort to learn more about their language and culture. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. By taking part in this program, you already show a commitment to learning more about your target language, and the people in this program will want to help you improve in any way that they can. By trying your best, even when you're unsure if you're correct, and when you're feeling tired, you will maximize the progress and personal connections you'll make throughout this program. Next slide, please. Thank you all for listening. I hope you find some of this information useful, and I wish you the best moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. I think that'll be really helpful for future NSLI-Y students. Really appreciate your insights there. So next we will be hearing from Ryan.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me correctly? Good.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Sorry, I was having troubles. So hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Merchant, and I'm an alumnus of the 2018 Tajik Persian Summer Program, which took place in Dushanbe, which is the capital of Tajikistan. I had an amazing time on the program, and the main highlight for me was visiting ancient historical sites and natural beauty, and seeing natural beauty that you really can't see anywhere else. And I hope that, I'm hoping that at least some of you can apply to this program and experience Tajikistan for yourself, because it really was an unforgettable experience. Next slide, please. So over the course of our program, as with every NSLI-Y program, every person in our cohort ran into our own unique language learning obstacles, and that's normal, perfectly normal. But there are some things that you can do to kind of minimize the obstacles that you face. You won't be able to get rid of them completely, but you can make your time, the time you spend in your host country, a bit easier for your brain, and make it so you feel more comfortable while you're there and you're not constantly stressing out about what people are saying. So I very much agree, just want to reiterate again with what Richard said earlier about doing very small things at first just to feel very comfortable with the language. It's something I always try to do with any language I'm studying. I mainly do with music. I try and listen to as much music as possible. Not only does it get you acquainted with the sounds of the language and kind of like the phrases everybody's saying, so you don't feel as too, uncomfortable. It also gets you acquainted with the cadence of things, how things are said, not just, the phonetics, the like vowels and consonants, but also in this situation, people are gonna kind of say this and this way. So you can sound kind of more authentic and more kind of like a native speaker. And of course, that the production of sounds is what you're there for. You're there to produce language. So listening is the key part of that. It also, and something for me that happened for me was if you look into kind of like the pop music scene in the country, or just popular artists, celebrities, singers, something like that, that your family might know, you can bring it up to them, and it can provide you another, common topic of interest that you can talk about with your host family. And it'll be really nice for you guys because you guys can talk about something coming from two completely different worlds. So it's really good to have at least something that, binds you together that way. So yeah, preparing for your time in your host country is very important, but you can only go so far. So once you get there, it's still going to be stressful. In my case, for our program, we ended up only having 2 days of actual classes before we joined our family at like 9 a.m. on a national holiday. So we were there with them basically after 2 days in the country, 3 days after arriving. We were there with them for like just 12, 15 hours straight. I mean, you're just in the house. There's nothing else to do except talk to your host family. And of course, that's going to be difficult since you don't have any language skills at that point in time, or maybe you'll have some. But even if you've studied like the language for like in an academic environment before, you're going to be very tired because it's the first time your brain is going to be actually, you know, living a language, living in that world compared to experiencing it only for a few hours a week. And of course, that's going to be very hard. And then in the coming, you know, first week or so, first 2 weeks or so, there's going to be so much more input, not just, you know, family life, but going out to restaurants, going out on class excursions, going out to different museums, everything. Like everything is going to be new. You're going to experience, it's going to feel like you're experiencing life like all over again, like as a baby, like learning language, because you don't know what's going on at all. And that's going to get a bit discouraging because, well, not discouraging, but it's going to be uncomfortable. And you're not going to want to kind of speak your target language because it feels like you're just drowning in your target language. So there's going to be kind of a tendency, well, not a tendency, but a desire among everybody to speak English as much as possible, just to get back to something that's very familiar to you. And while that, of course, it's important to give your brain breaks and, you know, interact in the language that you want, you've been speaking for most of your lives, presumably, you're going to want to go through and make the most of your experience. Next slide, please. So as I just said, it's important to utilize every opportunity that you can to practice. Really step out of your kind of linguistic comfort zone. You're going to want to go, not necessarily go up to every random person on the street, but if you're lost, don't be, you know, too shy to ask for directions just because you don't know what they'll say. Like, go up, see if you can ask somebody. If you're trying to buy water from somebody, you don't know where something is, just do as much as you can to try and get yourself understood. Even if you have to resort to charades like in public instead of outside, just with your host family, the more you go through those situations, the more you're going to feel confident in your ability to communicate in that country and in that language. And you're going to learn a lot. So just make sure not to fall into that kind of trap of just not wanting to go out and try new things, because you're going to constantly be trying new things by default, but you just want to try even more than that to just like widen your horizons in a way. Next slide, please. So a few things that I came up with to go along with that, things that help with me personally. There are a few situations where I feel like you can learn quite a lot if you can remember to do this kind of tips. So something I did a lot was when I was at home with my host family, I would just not know what to say sometimes. Or they would say something and I have no idea what they're saying. They would explain it, they would do charades, they would draw stuff I would not understand, and it would be like 30 minutes into a conversation that I have no idea what they're saying. Make sure to either, well, two things: bring a dictionary with you, pocket dictionary, or something that you can bring on your phone, or just like a print dictionary that you can use. And that can really help. That saved my life. Not literally, but like it did save my life in communication quite a few times with my family. And if you can't figure out something because it's too colloquial and they don't have it in dictionaries, or just something else that you can't find, write it down, bring it to your teachers the next day. They'll be happy to help, of course. Or you can even text like your local coordinator if you really want to continue the conversation, because they're there to help you 24/7. But yeah, if you ask somebody, your teachers, your local coordinator, for these words, you can continue the conversation the next day once you get back from school or something else. But always try and like remember these little things that not necessarily like they are commonly used words, but they're only going to cope in that conversation. So like just try and gain different words in different areas, you know, just because it's a kind of like a one-off thing where you didn't understand it, forget it, don't do that. Just make sure to try and practice all these uncommon words. Something that we also did a lot was speaking to CLS students. So unlike NSLI-Y, CLS students, since they're all in college, they have a language pledge. that they all had to sign. So what that means is over the course of the program, they are not allowed to speak English basically at all to any fellow participants or to their teachers. They had to speak English to us because we didn't know any Persian when we first met them. But of course, you're going to learn more and you'll be able to communicate more with them. And since they want to, learn, in Tajikistan, it was only the CLS cohort, the NSLI-Y cohort, and just some small other groups and some embassy people. So there's not many Americans there. So they're going to want to talk to other people they can relate to just as much as you want to. So it's very helpful to speak to them, especially since, if you literally don't speak any, of your target language at the time, they're allowed to help out and they'll want to help out. So it's just general, like good for them, good for you. Make sure to do it. Next slide, please. Another thing that really helped me out a lot was preparing for scenarios that I would come up with in my head because I was like, oh, what if I don't know this? What if I order something wrong? And I got really nervous about it. So I would always try and like figure out what I should say or what, real Tajik people would say in that situation rather than something that I would make up in my head and be like, oh, that's right. Maybe it is right, but maybe it would be interpreted wrong, or maybe it's just maybe it's just completely wrong. Like you don't know since you're not a native speaker. So you can also go to your teachers and ask for those. Of course, in your textbooks, you're gonna have scenarios, but they're gonna be quite different from what you yourself will have trouble communicating with as a student. Well, depending on the textbook, I haven't seen all of them obviously, but it's definitely important to try and prepare for stuff ahead of time. So then you at least have a small foundation to work off of when you go something. Maybe you remember one key word that will help you in the conversation continue that conversation or something like that. I remember sometimes I would be talking to strangers and then I'd forget a word that they said or that I'm trying to say. And then the conversation kind of ends and it is awkward and you don't see them again, but you kind of you miss a chance to practice something that in real life that you've been wanting to practice. And finally, the main tip, of course, taking breaks. NSLI, besides being obviously a mentally strenuous program, is also physically strenuous because you're going to be doing, for me at least, I did a lot more walking because I was like in the heart of the city compared to where I live here in the US at home. I live in the suburbs, so you're doing a lot more walking. It's going to be hot. It's going to be summer. Most of the NSLI-Y countries in the summer are very hot. So you're going to need to be drinking lots of water, eating lots of food, and sleeping a lot. Trust me, it's not good to miss out on any of those things. You're there for only so long. If your brain's not fully equipped to kind of seize the day, carpe diem, then you're not going to be able to learn as much, and it'll bite you back on maybe tests on your OPI, post-program OPI, or something else. I know there's some, in my case, specifically in Tajikistan, it's very common for families to go to sleep late, so like midnight or 1 a.m. I'm still not sure why, but I felt bad that I was, leaving my host family to just talk out in the yard, and they were just chilling, and I was like, oh, sorry, I have homework. But it was really necessary, and obviously, like, you can feel free to stay out with your host family and interact with them because that's the main thing. But if it comes between, your personal well-being and kind of anything else in the program, choose your personal well-being. And yeah, I believe that's all I have. I just wanted to remark quickly on this photo because it's one of my favorite photos from Tajikistan. So this is Iskandarkul, which literally means Alexander's Lake. So it's a huge mountainous lake in Tajikistan. It's way up in the mountains. And we took a break there, as you can see in this in the bottom right of the photo. But basically the legend is that Alexander the Great, when he came through Tajikistan towards like South Asia, he and his soldiers ended up stopping here. I don't know if that's true, but it makes for a great story. And it's also, one of the greatest places I've ever seen and been to, natural wonders and all that. And just the road getting there was also amazing as well. So that convinces you to go to Tajikistan, I would love that as well. But yeah, other than that, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. And that's indeed a really beautiful photo, and I'm sure it's way even better in person. And thank you for really taking us inside the mind of an immersed language learner and how exhausting that could be, but also how exhilarating too. And finally, we have Aurelia, so I will hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So like we said when we were doing the introductions, hi, my name is Aurelia Vanderhold. I'm from Spokane, Washington. I'm currently getting my BA in International Relations and Economics, and my study abroad experience is I'm an alumna of the NSLI-Y Bahasa Indonesia Summer Program in Jakarta 2018, and I'm also a Yes Abroad 2019-2020 alumna. So I was hosted in Malang for Yes. Next slide, please. So yeah, just initial challenges. One of my biggest challenges going into NSLI was that I really didn't speak that much Indonesian. I could say most of the letters of the alphabet correctly, and I could count. I also knew the song for the days of the week, but that was pretty much it. I couldn't say how old I was, I couldn't get directions, and this was a big challenge at first. There were many ways, though, and many tools that I was provided with that really helped me overcome this. The first one was practice. I tried to practice Indonesian, whether I was just in the car with my host parents or with other NSLI-Y students, and this made a big difference. Just the more you can speak, the more you can read, the more you can write, that can be helpful. I remember we would be driving and there would be signs. My host parents would say like, Aurel, you should read the numbers on that sign, or Aurel, like, what's this number? And I would just say it back to them. So that was super helpful, even with something that's more basic like numbers. So practicing with your host family is super helpful. Also, just like your host family is a great resource and can help you a lot. My host family personally taught me so much more Indonesian than I could ever learn in the classroom. So yeah, for example, the first day that I arrived in Indonesia, my host dad said, Aurel, you are going to learn 10 new words every day. And at first I was like, wow, 10 new words a day, that is a lot. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. We were having our conversation at dinner. He taught me 10 words. I had a notebook, so I just put them down there. And then the next thing you knew, it was the next morning, like pretty early in the morning, because we wanted to avoid the Jakarta traffic. And my host mom said like, okay, Papa has a question for you. And what do you know? The question was, what are the 10 words that we learned yesterday? So, and that just continued throughout the program. And this ended up being super helpful because I felt like I was able to just challenge myself. And eventually the 10 words felt pretty easy, and every single day it was 10 new words. So definitely practicing your host family, speaking with them. My host parents both spoke some English, but my host grandma did not. So if I was able to spend time talking with her, that would be great as well. And for like my host mom, she would they were Christian. We would go to church, as you can see in the top right photo. And if someone came up to me and they wanted to speak with me in English, she would tell them, well, you need to at least practice with her in Indonesian. She came all the way over here just to learn Indonesian. So yeah, another thing to remember is just asking questions to your teachers. In the bottom photo, you can see a picture of all of my teachers. And whenever I had a question, I would try and write it down in my notebook and just bring it for class the next day. Finally, if you can learn the basics before, there's a lot of resources for most of the NSLI languages, and even just knowing the alphabet can really help you once you're on program, because that's one less thing that you have to learn there. And when you're on program, you really want to be focusing on getting the slang, improving your vocabulary. So yeah, that's it for your initial challenges. Next slide. Okay, perfect. And then challenges that you may face once you're on program and once your program has really started to go. So in Indonesia, one of my biggest challenges was understanding indirect versus direct communication. So in Indonesia, it's a more indirect culture. So rather than telling someone that, like, let's say you can't go somewhere, you might tell someone, well, hopefully I'll go there, or maybe I'll go there, or inshallah, which means God willing in Arabic, I'll go there. And that really just means no. And this can go both ways. Someone might be telling you something and it really might just mean that it's not going to happen, or you might have to respond to that. And if you tell someone like maybe, they'll think no when you really meant maybe. So that was a big challenge. But there's a lot of ways that you can overcome this. Honestly, asking questions, people will understand that you're new in the country and you're new with the language, and they'll be more than happy to answer questions and clarify. It's better to ask a million questions than have a misunderstanding if you can avoid that. Another big thing, Ryan and Richard spoke about this earlier, but language fatigue. This is something that is totally normal and that happens to everyone. I remember being absolutely exhausted by the end of the day. Sometimes I would be like, oh my gosh, it's only like 5 o'clock and I really just want to sleep. And that's totally okay, and that's totally normal. In Indonesia, what I would do is sometimes I would take a nap, but I would take a nap in like a public area, for example, in the living room, rather than just staying in my room, so that then when I woke up, I would be ready to speak with my host family. So, and another example was on Yes Abroad, my host family, after we finished like getting the house ready on the weekend, we would all just take a break. We would go to my host grandma's house and sleep for a bit. So this is totally normal. It's just important that you make sure that you're also spending quality time with your host family as well. Next slide, please. Okay, finally, one of the biggest challenges is once you return home from program, it can be really hard to keep all of your language skills. So you might have learned a lot while you're on program. You might come back. I remember when I came back, I was able to speak about most subjects to some degree, and I was really like, wow, I have all of this Indonesian. So now what are you going to do with it? Especially with some of these smaller programs like Tajik and Indonesian, there might not be a lot of native speakers within your community, but you can still maintain the language skills that you learned. One way that I did this was I studied abroad, and I was thankfully awarded the Yes Abroad scholarship. So for the Yes Abroad scholarship, I studied abroad in Indonesia for a year, and I continued to have language classes. So I had language classes once a week on Yes Abroad, and I was able to not only maintain my Indonesian, but also improve it. Another resource can be, you can check and see if the embassy provides classes. For Indonesian, the KBRI, or the Kedutaan Besar Republik Indonesia, offers free Indonesian classes to anyone 14 and up. So you can start that now if you want to get a head start on the language, or once you return from program, it's a great resource. I have been taking classes through the KBRI this is my 3rd semester, and it has been really fun, really enjoyable. And I've been able to meet other Americans who also speak Indonesian. So some of them were on different State Department programs such as Fulbright or CLS, and others just decided to start learning because it's a great free resource and they're very enjoyable. Like other alumni have said, reading books, watching movies, listening to music, etc. in your target language can be a great resource. And this can be a great way to practice once you've returned home, and you can continue to learn more about your host country. One specific resource, the NSLI alumni Instagram posts resources in target languages. We also post media recommendations such as movies. One of my favorites that we posted recently for Indonesian was Keluarga Cemara, which is a great Indonesian movie. It's on Netflix, and you can really learn a lot, not only Bahasa Indonesia, but you can also hear local dialects such as Sundanese. So that's it for me. Thank you guys so much.
Great, thank you so much for sharing and for pointing out a lot of the ways that someone can maintain language after returning from an immersion study. I think that's really important and something that can be difficult, but is also really fun and useful. Next slide. So we're going to move now into our Q&A session. As I mentioned earlier, anyone in this Zoom can feel free to just unmute themselves, to write in the chat, use the raise hand function, whichever way is most comfortable for them to ask any questions. This is really your opportunity to hear from our panelists and from NSLI-Y alumni, so please don't be shy. Please ask questions. And we will look at the Facebook chat as well. And we also have some questions on our end. So I think we can stop sharing so we can see all the panelists. I will start off with a question, and maybe some of the people in the Zoom can write some questions as panelists are answering this first one. So I'm curious, I'll ask Richard first, but other panelists can then answer. When you look back, is there anything that you might have done differently regarding your language learning process if you could do it all over, or anything that you would make sure that you would do again?
I think that if I was to do it over again, I might really just kind of start. I think I would probably like start like looking into like the news. I think like Indonesian news earlier on. I think that was something really great that I kind of got into towards the later part of my program. But I thought that it was really nice because it included like a lot of good vocabulary, and it helped me like with my listening comprehension. But it also just kind of gave me a cultural context. And during the time that I was there was actually a very interesting time politically in Indonesia. So I think that it's just a good idea because it helps build up your language skills, and it also kind of tells you about the place that you're studying, and kind of gives you a nice perspective.
Great, thank you. Aurelia, do you have any thoughts there?
I definitely think like the news can be a great resource. That's something that I've also continued to do. And I think that for me, it would have been nice to go to Indonesia knowing a little bit more Indonesian. I'm really thankful that my host family taught me so much. I'm really glad that we were able to stay in touch, but it still would have been nice to just have a head start.
Ryan, do you want to add anything? I see we have a hand raised, but just wanted to give you the chance first.
I think Richard and Aurelia covered most of it pretty well. I think something I would have done more in the case of, I don't know if Bahasa Indonesia like has a similar thing, but it's really hard to get Tajik like materials here in the US, obviously. So I would have literally taken like physical newspapers. I got books, but like I would have liked to have different topics. So it's good to, you know, well, if you're in your host country, try and get as much as you can.
Great, thank you. So I see we have a question. I apologize in advance if I say your name wrong, but Raquel?
It's Rachel.
Rachel, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that the program is like such a once in a lifetime experience, and since you're only there for a few weeks, how did you like utilize the program and really make the most of it in order to maximize your learning experience, especially since like you're not going to be there for like an extended period of time?
I guess I could start with this one. I had a composition notebook with me that I took with me everywhere. And I would just, anytime I heard a new word, I would ask people how to spell it. I would ask them what it meant, and that really helped. And then I think that using NSLI more as a catalyst for future language learning can be really helpful. Staying in touch with the people that you meet on program. I still text, WhatsApp. I video called with my NSLI host family just the other week, and it can be really great to keep these connections so that you can continue learning. So that's my biggest recommendations. Try and make as many connections as you can with your host family and outside, and then also just continue studying the language. With Bahasa Indonesia, it seems like there's a new resource every week. So.
Yeah, so I would definitely say that like that you should not stop like your language learning once the classes are over. So of course it's going to depend on like where you are and what language you're speaking, but like after a couple of weeks, I was able to kind of get around the city, and Jakarta is very kind of navigable, just on your own. So it was really nice to be able to kind of get around, get like taxis, talk to people when I was like going different places. So I would highly encourage you to like take advantage of that, and don't just make this about the language, make part of it about like the experience of speaking with other people while you have that chance.
For me, something that I thought was really important, well, just on my end for language learning, in terms of like exposure to colloquial language, you're only going to get so much of that when you're there on NSLI. In a classroom, you really won't get that. Here back in the States, or even in your target country, you will not get colloquial language really unless you ask about it specifically. So something I did, besides, also did the composition notebook like Aurelia did, but I would try and like ask specifically questions about like colloquial language, because at least in Tajikistan it varies a lot from the standard language. So just trying to get as much of that exposure to the colloquial language, I thought for me mattered a lot, because it's kind of like a class that is not taught anywhere else.
Great, thank you for all those answers. If there's any follow-up, Rachel, feel free to unmute yourself again or in the chat, but I do see we have a question from Fiona, which is, after doing the program, would you say you're fluent in the language you studied?
I think I can speak for all of us when I say no, but I think that with NSLI, you will make more progress than you would in, let's say, a year of academic classes at university, college, or just general academic settings here. You would make more progress than 1 year at least. Everybody's different. You're going to absorb things at different rates, your different stages of your life. So it varies, but you'll at least get more than 1 year of, academic setting out of it. And that's generally also what NSLI, you're told to like post-program if you're trying to test into a language. That is also what they say NSLI equates to.
I would agree with that. When I went to Indonesia with Yes, I was able to test to about an intermediate level, and I'm currently in the Indonesian level 4-ish, which is advanced, but it's been 3 years. So it takes time, and I learn something new every week.
Yeah, I would say that during the course of the study, it's going to depend on which language you're pursuing. But for me, I was able to get around the city by myself and talk to people about a range of topics at least in kind of a basic level by the end of my time there.
Great. And speaking of that, I kind of had a question about what was a moment where you realized that you had made significant progress and things started to kind of click with you regarding the language, and what did you think that led up to that moment? A moment where you feel like, you really things kind of made sense and you kind of were communicating well.
So I think for me, it was probably when I was riding in a taxi and I had a conversation with the driver about like his political views, I think. And about like his view on the election that was happening there at the time. It was just really kind of interesting just to see like how much progress I'd made. And I'd say that the steps that kind of led me to there was like both just really trying to pay attention during class and get as much as I could out of that, and really taking the exercises seriously, and also trying to be a little bit flexible with them and try to use them in a variety of different ways, but also just trying to like stay up to date on what's actually happening, and try to approach people with things that they might be interested in, and have conversations that way.
Something I think for me, I guess I did have a click, but I didn't want to really speak about that in regards to this question. I just want to say like there may be like you may get a click somewhere along the line. But I have heard, for example, we met a lady in Tajikistan who had been studying, she was with American councils there, and she'd been studying Russian through college. She'd been living in Tajikistan for like a long time. It's been like 6 years, it was like studying Russian. It took her all that time before it started clicking. So like if you do a program, if you do any type of language learning, it might take forever for it to click for you, but when it clicks, it'll all come together because you're still learning. It doesn't have to click, all at once or, within the course of a 6-week program. It can take years. So just like if you're doing language learning in NSLI, outside of NSLI, like keep that in mind. You're always going to be learning. You don't necessarily have to find like that spark of inspiration like very quickly.
I would say a time when I had my click on program was definitely. So my host family, we went to church every week, and starting about the second week, I helped out in the Sunday school because that was much more on my level than the church service. And by the end, I remember the last week I was able to like understand what was happening in class, and I didn't need to be told what to do by the kids. And that was just a great moment.
Awesome, thank you. I see we have 2 raised hands. I'm going to call on Hugh first because they haven't asked a question yet.
I just want to ask, when you're not taking classes and you're on like weekends, what is a typical weekend? I mean, I assume it varies, but what is, I didn't even, you mentioned church, but what does a typical weekend look like when you have sort of unstructured time?
So I think it will obviously depend based on every single program, like you mentioned. I think something that is the same for every single program is weekends. They do want to have you, the program does want you to have like a lot of time with your host family. And especially because during the week, you're going to be doing excursions and sometimes on the weekends as well. But that time is mainly for, you know, if you can go out, spending time with your host family, going out, not necessarily on your own. Don't go out on your own in a foreign country, that's bad. But with, you know, a group, maybe you can try and go somewhere that you want to try their food or go to a museum or something like that. It's for you to like really take advantage of the opportunity, whether you're going out with friends, your host family, just more so. I mean, you can do, if on some weekends, if there's no activity, you could just do nothing and stay in your room, but I mean, your host family probably wouldn't like that, so.
On the Indonesian program, it definitely varied, but for my host family, Sunday was normally like church and family day. And then if we did something, it would normally be on Saturday. So we might like clean the house a little bit and then either go into Jakarta, because I lived in Bekasi, which is a little bit away from Jakarta, depending on traffic. And then sometimes we would just visit with extended host family as well. So that was just really enjoyable and relaxing.
Yeah, so in my experience as well, it was largely at the discretion of the host families. There was one excursion that we had that was over one of the weekends that we all did kind of as like a NSLI group. But a lot of times over the weekends, I would be with my family going to different sites throughout Jakarta.
Great, thank you all for sharing that. And I see Rachel has another question.
Yeah, my question was, like, I know that the program is made for people of like all language levels. So like whether you're like beginner, like to advanced, but like if you go to the country, like was your experience harder if you went there without knowing anything versus someone who maybe tested into like an intermediate level?
Yeah,
So we actually had kind of experience with that. I had experience with that on my program because we had 2 students who had actually studied Persian at like.
So for me, I can only like share my own experience.
Oh shit. Sorry.
Sorry, I think it's unstable. If you want to go ahead, I think it's lagging for me.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry, I did not see Richard speaking for like 5 minutes there. Thank you, Richard. So yeah, we had 2 students who had studied the language for like a year beforehand. And for them, it was still also hard as well. Everybody has like a difficult experience, like I said earlier. And you're all kind of going to be learning things together, because even they who had like been in like the advanced class, like they wouldn't know how to say things either because they were in a classroom. So like everybody's going to be in that learning experience all together. Maybe it's different if you're like for like Chinese, because I know people have been studying Chinese for crazy long amounts of time now. But yeah, like everybody's in it together, even if you've been learning for like a really long time.
Richard, do you want to go ahead now?
Yes, so sorry, I was just going to say that I can only share my own experience really, but I think that, again, it's going to depend on the language, but you can definitely make it easier on yourself, like even if you're not intermediate, just by trying to like learn as much about kind of the structure of the language as possible before you go, and just hearing it as much as you can beforehand. Just because I know that for some languages, I thought that I knew some of the basic language, and then I actually started hearing it and I had no idea what they were saying. So I think that for that, it doesn't really matter if like on paper you're an intermediate learner or an elementary learner. Just hearing it for the first time is going to be kind of a big shock. So I think that definitely exposing yourself to the language, no matter what level you are, will improve like just your initial kind of learning curve.
I can just speak to that from a personal experience. So when I went to Indonesia with NSLI, I was a pretty much complete beginner, and it was challenging. I would say just beyond the language difficulty, there's a cultural aspect. So if someone has experience with the culture and they understand that, then they might, but they don't have any language experience, they might have a bigger advantage than someone who only has language experience. So that's a big thing. I know that for me, it was definitely easier once I was at more of an intermediate level, not only just for like the cultural understanding, but I remember a big question was like how does the American electoral system work? And when I first got there, I couldn't exactly explain the electoral college in Indonesian, but by the time I was at an intermediate level, this was something that didn't end in charades or a lot of diagrams. So if you can get to a point, if you can learn some of the language, if you can learn some about the culture, it will be easier, especially at first.
Thank you so much for sharing all those different perspectives. I'm going to ask maybe one last question before we go on to the conclusion. And I'm kind of curious because, one of the goals of the NSLI-Y program is to spark an interest in languages that are less commonly taught in the US, and as you alluded to, may also have fewer resources. So I'm curious what motivated you all to learn your language of choice and why you valued learning it while on the NSLI-Y program. How about Aurelia, you start.
Okay, I wanted to learn Indonesian, well, a few reasons. So my grandpa was born in Indonesia, but I didn't really hear a lot about him or his family growing up. It had been after the war. So I wanted to learn more about that. Honestly, I had the chance to actually see the house that he grew up with, which was a super impactful moment. So I wanted to learn about that. I also just found Bahasa Indonesia super interesting. If you look at the history of the language, I read a paper about it earlier, but it's just like the language was kind of made when they decided that they needed to have they wanted independence from the Dutch. So it's a big combination of different languages like Arabic. Malay is definitely big. Javanese, Hindi, and there's a lot of influence. I'm taking Arabic right now, and I was surprised by how many words were the same in Bahasa Indonesia and Arabic. So that was really interesting. And I also just wanted to learn more about the region, and I thought that Indonesia would be a great place to learn about, and it would be a great language to learn because there's so many different groups in Indonesia, both ethnically and then also in terms of like the different countries that have colonized Indonesia and the different people who have immigrated to Indonesia have had such a large impact on the country. So that's why I wanted to learn it. And just like continuing to learn it after NSLI, I really fell in love with the language. I wanted to continue studying as much as I could, and I wanted to potentially work in the region. So that's why I've continued with it. And it really, learning a new language can open up so many doors and so many opportunities for you just socially and also in terms of other opportunities. So.
Great, thank you. Richard, I think you were about to share as well.
Yes, so I was trying to figure out what I really wanted to do before I applied to the NSLI program, and I was interested in like kind of a broad range of subjects from like linguistics, history, ecology, and just in all these respects, I just found Indonesia to be an incredibly fascinating place. As Aurelia talked about, the history of the language is really interesting, and I just really appreciated like how much of Indonesia I just like found to be very kind of unique. And I also think an aspect of it was the fact that it is kind of underrepresented in like the American consciousness. And even though it's the world's fourth largest population, it just seems like it's not, it's not often recognized as that. So I think that it was really incredible to kind of learn so much about this country that I knew was extremely large on kind of the global scene, but I hadn't really heard much about, just growing up.
For me, I initially really knew nothing about Tajikistan besides what was on the NSLI website. But I had known a lot about, I'd been listening to a lot of Persian songs. Persian poetry is famous kind of worldwide. And there's a lot of different things that had been kind of publicized that I had known advertised about Persian culture. And as well as also Persian language has had a huge influence on the South Asian subcontinent where I'm from. So I wanted to learn more about that. I could read some stuff better in some languages because of a lot of the loan words. But then as I looked into Tajikistan, the history of it just became so fascinating to me as, it was a post-Soviet state. And just all the little things that, people from previous NSLI cohorts had posted on videos. They posted about the watermelon. They posted about all these different things. They went swimming in like these huge lakes, mountainous lakes, different from the one I showed, but they would go to these amazing places that not many people had ever had thought about. I know I certainly hadn't, and places that a lot of people here in America don't even know kind of exist. So it just was amazing to see all that and to have an opportunity to go and see to see Tajikistan and see those places and experience that for myself was, well, so far it's been once in a lifetime. So definitely worth it. Just amazing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate those answers and hearing about your diverse motivations. So we're going to move to the conclusion, if the last slide could be shown, but I will start speaking. So yeah, here you have some NSLI-Y resources. So as listed here, for more information on the NSLI-Y program and application, please visit the NSLI-Y for Youth website at nsli4youth.org, and I'll drop it in the chat. Sorry, one second here. And applications are expected to open up very soon, and the deadline will be in early November. To read student and alumni stories about NSLI-Y, please visit the NSLI-Y Interactive website at nsli-interactive.org. I will also drop that in the chat to find out more about student and alumni stories from their perspectives. So we hope that prospective applicants that have been watching this webinar on Zoom or on Facebook or later on YouTube will consider applying for the NSLI-Y program. And before the people in the Zoom room go, I would really appreciate if you could fill out a very short survey that I'm also going to put in the chat. It will take just a minute to fill out and will help us craft more events in the future that people can attend. I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists, Aurelia, Richard, and Ryan. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and perspectives and sharing some great photos and stories. I know that I really appreciated hearing it, and I'm sure others did as well. And thank you everyone who attended, whether you're attending live right now or you're going to be watching a recording in the future. And I hope everyone has a good night. Thank you. Bye.